let me just say that we're thrilled to pieces to have our speaker today. Hi, Mariampolski. He's from New York, but this afternoon he's been there for several weeks now, but he's from in Northern California with his children and family out there. But I think Hi is just one of many people that our friend Susan Lane has introduced me to through the years and in the last few months. And, you know, has an interesting name, Mariampolski. And to think, I kind of put two and two together, and I realized this is the man that we're going to get to see and hear today, who has written just a number of wonderful articles in postcardhistory.net. Go to it and look. You can sort through. I did the other day by author. And so you can find Hi's articles and read them. He has a very good one, a clever, instructive and everything about the Club 82 review in New York City. This was a famous club on, I think it said, the Lower East Side. And he illustrated the article with 9 postcards, different ones, and there may be more, but Hi's awfully good about collecting and finding and ferreting out and trading for those that he still needs. So they're great postcards, and they're really, as we know, just documents. They're documentary history of what we are seeing and what we enjoy and so forth. So we're glad to have Hi here. He's going to be talking about the early train travel in New York City. And I want you to look at these cards and just realize this is before cars. It's before trucks and big lorries and so forth like that in the city that you see today. What you're going to see a lot is horse-drawn equipment on the streets when he does show a street scene. But these are early, they're wonderful cards. I asked him about, you know, how did you find these? And lots of good stories there too. But I think you'll be really in for a treat to see and to hear this presentation about early trains in New York City. And he'll go into it in detail, of course. But thank you, Hi, for being with us today. And please join me in welcoming Hi Mariampolski to this virtual program.
Hello, everybody. Hello in Wichita and beyond. It's a pleasure for me to be here together with you. And what I wanted to say is that this is part of a larger project that I'm involved with called Wish You Were Here, which is a postcard history of New York. And this piece on trains is just one section of my collection, which is now about 12,000 historic pieces. And I unfortunately, I had to select about those 70 or 80 cards, but I drew these from about 3,000 cards of trains that I have. I'll give you a brief history of trains in New York, and we'll go through some of the local train systems, some of the national train systems. We'll go through the styles. We'll take a look at the kinds of cards that collectors are looking for. I remember as Hal and some of and Alan and some of you others know, I lived in Kansas for a while, and I began to become an avid collector of postcards when I lived in Kansas. And one thing I noticed in Kansas was how avidly postcards of trains were collected. Well, I can tell you that New York City trains are just as avidly collected, and I'm going to show you the reasons why. Um, um, my first card is actually a postcard, and it shows the regional network of trains all over the city of New York. And it's a very instructive card because it's from about, I'd say, 1903 to 1905, but it shows you some of the problems that train travel experienced in New York. Um, my presentation covers roughly the period of the 1890s to the 1960s. And this was the period in which train travel predominated, not just in New York City, but throughout the world. After the 1960s, in the United States, we had the interstate highway system being rapidly developed. We had the air network developed. And so train travel experienced, let's say, a rough time after the 1960s. But let's go back before then. And this is the system of trains that existed in New York. There's one interesting problem trains experienced, and that was that New York is not a contiguous landmass, but consists of several islands and rivers, and the toughest river to cross in many ways was the Hudson River, which separated New York from New Jersey. So we'll look at this as a whole. You'll recall that during this period, New York became the leading commercial and financial center, not only in the United States, but also the world. So how did New York become this magnificent commercial center? It had many competitors, Philadelphia, Boston. Well, let's say that what happened to get New York off the ground actually started in the 1820s with the construction of the Erie Canal. Those of you who live up in Rochester know the Erie Canal well. I was just up there myself, and what happened was that the Erie Canal connected the Atlantic Ocean with the Great Lakes, and by doing that, it opened up the interior of the country to commercialization. That after the development of the Erie Canal, we saw the commercialization not just of the Great Lakes cities, including Rochester, but it opened up the interior. There was a system of canals and river traffic, and New York kind of became the nexus, the center of all this. New York also had a system of river traffic and traffic along Long Island and Long Island Sound. Back in the early part of the 19th century up to the 1910s, 1920s, river traffic was very important. If you wanted to get from New York to Boston, you had an overnight packet ship that brought you there. And let's say that for the benefit of our Canadian cousins, New York also opened up the interior of Canada. It made commerce feasible throughout Canada and the United States. So this kind of depicts the regional network. When the trains grew, they grew in recognition of the water traffic. And this is a wonderful card because it shows the construction of the East River Tunnel and puts it in the context of the water traffic that existed at that time. The Statue of Liberty is in this corner, and the harbor continued to be a very, very busy harbor. But after the Civil War, trains began to slowly augment and replace ship traffic. But remember, we had this problem of the Hudson River. This is a great Detroit card from about 1903, 1905 that shows West Street. And this image was taken today. It would be, just north of the World Trade Center site. But you see the ports, the harbor for ocean going and local traffic. And over here, you see the terminus for the Lackawanna Railroad. This was how trains came into New York. They came in not by train, but by ferry. That's there was not yet a tunnel connecting New York to New Jersey. And this was where in New Jersey, the trains ended. This is the famous Manhattan Transfer. Trains that were going on to Philadelphia, Washington, the Western states came into this area. From this point on, the people and the goods came into New York by ferry. And New York had another problem, which was connecting the boroughs. And as many of you know, the New York City consolidated in 1897, becoming Greater New York. The main event of that consolidation was the unification of the cities of Brooklyn and New York. So Manhattan, New York became the borough of Manhattan, and the city of Brooklyn became the borough of Brooklyn. The first link between, the most important link between New York and Brooklyn came with the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge. And this is what the New York terminus of the Brooklyn Bridge looked like. It was a train terminal that connected the traffic coming over from Brooklyn to the elevated lines, to the streetcar system, and to the incipient subway system. So let's take a closer look at each of these systems of traffic, because the first response in New York to train travel was to create a system of elevated railroads. Now, this was not coordinated, it was not government sponsored. The development of the Ls, as they were called, the elevated railroads, were entrepreneurially sponsored. But there was a train, a suburban train that came down along the west side of Manhattan, came down to about 34th Street. And the first elevated train to try to meet up with the commuter traffic coming in from the suburbs and linking it to the financial district downtown was the 9th Avenue L. This was the Second and the Third Avenue L connecting to the Brooklyn Bridge. And while we're on the Third Avenue L, this was a famous intersection of the Third Avenue L. Some of you may recognize this as this location as being in the East Village. This is Cooper Square, and the building here is the famous Cooper Union. Peter Cooper made a lot of money as an inventor, and this is a statue of Peter Cooper, and he endowed the Cooper Union as a school devoted to engineering and architecture. It's still a school devoted to engineering and architecture, although it's grown considerably. And he endowed it to the degree that any student who was admitted to the Cooper Union was admitted on a free tuition basis. And here was the Third Avenue L that went up Third Avenue. In this direction, there's Fourth Avenue, and some of the long-term collectors of New York memorabilia remember Fourth Avenue very fondly because Fourth Avenue became the location of the used booksellers stores. And many of the old used booksellers used to keep boxes of postcards handy on the counter. And if you look at people's recollections of their early days in postcarding, for example, if you look at Leonard Lauder's recollections, he talks about going down to Fourth Avenue to collect postcards. This is a very early card, 1897. And what we said was that the elevated system extended into Brooklyn as well. There was elevated on Fulton Street and elevated on Fifth Avenue. And this is the Fulton Street L card published by Arthur Strauss. And you can tell it's a very early card because it refers to City Hall in Brooklyn. This building, which is still standing, was called City Hall until the consolidation of New York and Brooklyn. And afterwards, since 1897, it's been called Borough Hall. And here's the L kind of reaching down Fulton Street. The L also connected toward Fifth Avenue. This is the Fifth Avenue L connecting with the Fulton line. And right in back of this, you can only see the top of the building, is the terminus of the Long Island Railroad, connected to the Long Island Railroad, also a streetcar system. And here's an early kiosk for the Brooklyn subway system. Nowadays, some of you may be familiar with the Barclays Center, which has become an important sports stadium. New York Jets play at the Barclays Center, as well as many premier acts. This area today is just about 2 blocks west from the Barclays Center. And this is still the terminus, the Brooklyn terminus of the Long Island Railroad. Here's another beautiful shot, very early. I think this is 1896 souvenir card. And it shows the intersection of the Second and the Third Avenue L's. This is in Chatham Square, and some of you may know Chatham Square as the center of Chinatown. Today it's the center of Chinatown. Of course, the L's are long gone, but that's what it looked like at the time. An important L was located on 6th Avenue, and this is a rotograph card from about 1905 that shows the L going up 6th Avenue. 6th Avenue was then known as the Ladies' Mile. The Ladies' Mile meaning it was the preeminent shopping district for New York. And you could kind of get there on the 6th Avenue L, get off every few blocks, and do your shopping along the L. At the end of this, at about 34th Street, there was a special concentration of department stores. This is what the 34th Street station of the L looked like. And this was just opposite Gimbel's and Macy's. Macy's is still there. Gimbel's and the old EJ Corvette stores have been taken over by others, but this was a very fancy kiosk. No elevators, unfortunately. And there was a streetcar and horse-drawn hansom cabs that it connected to. And this is also a very early card from about 1897. Even though today we think of the L as very romantic, we think of it in nostalgic terms. The truth is, everybody hated the L. One of the reasons that everybody hated it was the L created dark spaces underneath the streets. And not only that, but people always complained about the ashes and everything else, the garbage that was flung from the L that landed in the streets. And of course, it made the streets very crowded to automobile traffic. This is an image from about the 20s, early 30s. And it's a beautiful image artistically, as is the next one. But it shows how dirty and dark it was under the L. Everybody hated it. When I remember in my own background, when I was a kid, my dad worked 58th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. And in those early years, they were tearing down the L in the early 1950s. And I remember the L being torn down on these streets, and everybody was so happy. Everybody was saying, "Oh, the streets are going to liven up. They're going to lighten up," and they did. It opened up 3rd Avenue to a tremendous rush of commercial and housing development. This is the famous Dead Man's Curve on the 9th Avenue L. Another very early card from the, I think this one is 1897. This was the highest point of the L and a very curvy track. And it was, when you read accounts of it, it was terrifying. It was, this today, it's Central Park West and about 110th Street. And it's in the neighborhood that today is called Manhattanville. Entry kiosk to the Ninth Avenue L, another card published by Kohler about 1898. These cards are highly collectible and very rare. All of these images of L stations and commerce around the L, the horse-drawn traffic and the shops. As I said, people hated the L. First of all, everybody saw the L as prone to accidents. And there were some, let's say, notable accidents that conveyed a horrific image. Here's a wreck on the Ninth Avenue L, and here's the famous Allen Street fire, which took place alongside the Second Avenue L. Everybody blamed the L for the fires. So even though the L was producing a lot of economic good, and people always said it was great to live a block away from the L rather than on the streets that the L was on. The push came to take down the L system and put it underground. This is the last run, an image of the last run of the Third Avenue L at Grand Central. And if you were here for last month's presentation, there was a lot going on at this intersection. The construction of, this is where the Chrysler building was located, the Channon building. It was, this shows the construction of the Saccone Mobile building in the international style. And I love this card, not just because of the great train imagery and the construction of a building, but there's also one of the old automats right here, an automat where you could purchase meals out of little containers. There was a lot of pressure for construction of a subway system underground. And one of the main points of pressure was to connect New Jersey and New York. And the earliest efforts to build a subway system was underground connecting New York and New Jersey. This underground system is still viable, even though it's changed a few times. Back then, it was known as the Hudson and Manhattan, or the H&M. Today, it's the PATH system, Port Authority Trans-Hudson. Now, if you look at this card, it may be familiar to some of you if you know the New York City subway system. This station, this underground structure, is little changed. And this is located at what today is Ground Zero, the World Trade Center. And these buildings here, the Hudson and Manhattan corporate offices were the original Twin Towers. No, I love collecting cards of the Hudson and Manhattan system because every inch of the construction of that system was documented on postcards, and the postcards are fabulous. About 20 people were killed in construction of the tunnel underneath the Hudson River. Here's another image of the tunnel being constructed under the Hudson River. Here's what the early early cars looked like. Here's one of those early stations. Now these interior shots, shots of the Hudson Manhattan being constructed, they're very, very highly regarded. All of them are from, they date from about 1903 to 1907. And finally, an effort was made to develop a subway system for Manhattan. And this is the Manhattan's first subway system, its first subway station underneath the City Hall. And the subway station was fabulous. First of all, you notice it was constructed using Guastavino tiles in Romanesque Revival style. Believe it or not, this subway station is still intact, even though it was taken out of service in about 1945. But this is one of those pieces of New York, sort of hidden New York, that's still there. You can, you know, they still have tours, underground tours, where you can see it. The Guastavino tiles are really a very special feature, and they are located at various places outside the system. But in 1945, they extended the number of trains per unit, and this was too small. So this station had to be removed from service. This is a great postcard commemorating the connection by subway of New York and Brooklyn. This is the train connecting New York City Hall to Brooklyn's Borough Hall. Now, one feature of the old subways that everybody loved were the old kiosks, the entry and exit kiosks. And I love collecting these cards that showed the entrances and exits to the subway. Here's a kiosk at Columbus Circle. There's the Columbus statue. This is where nowadays the headquarters of CNN are located. The Williamsburg Bridge entry kiosk, torn down in the 1930s. This one, the 72nd Street subway entryway, is actually still there, but it's a very, very nice collectible area that a lot of people enjoy collecting. One of the features of the earliest subway, this is the IRT system, which came out of City Hall Station and went up the both the west side and east side of Manhattan, were these very unique ceramic subway decorations that in a beautiful Art Nouveau style that celebrated the history of nearby history. This was the station this is the station at Wall Street. These decorations are still there and avidly preserved. Shows the old wall to separate the original Dutch settlement from Native Americans. Here's a subway station at Bleecker Street. Very similar, not very much changed. And 14th Street, 23rd Street. Fortunately, today there are elevators and other. Now the subways, if you knew the system, had routes extending into the boroughs, extending all over Manhattan, and there were local stops and express stops. Local stops meaning that there were not as heavily trafficked as the express stops, but these local stops on the Brooklyn subway, these are also very avidly collected. This is Parkville Station on the Brooklyn, the BMT line, just one or two cars in each of these subway trains. When the subways grew, they, instead of going on the surface at grade, they cut a channel for the subways. This is Newkirk Avenue. If I remember correctly, this is on the Culver line. And there's a cut, but it's not enclosed. And here's another subway station at grade. And here's a typical express stop. This was the station at Coney Island. And in the early days, you could ride anywhere in the system for a nickel. And the most popular destination was Coney Island. You'd spend a day at an amusement park for just a nickel. There was no subway connection to Staten Island. That doesn't mean that there were no efforts to promote a subway connection to Staten Island. And this is a very interesting card because it promotes a subway connection between Manhattan and Staten Island. Staten Island had its own system, and also a very colorful system. The subways went along the Hudson into the Bronx. Here's the terminus of the subway at 230th Street in Kingsbridge in the Bronx. And throughout New York, you also had the suburban lines going through the city. This is the NYNH and H railroad station. That is the New York, New Haven, and Harlem Railroad. Happened as a result of consolidation of a few of the railroad systems. But the independent railroads and the separation of the commuter systems from the subway system, a lot of this came to a shrieking halt in the mid-60s. The finances were not feasible, and there was a famous subway strike that occurred on January 1st, 1966, that made everybody realize something needs to be done with the subways. Then there were the commuter systems. And the most important commuter system was the Long Island Railroad. And I have a particular fondness for the Long Island Railroad because the Long Island Railroad went through Queens as an independent system and continues all the way out to Montauk on Long Island. It's a trip of about an hour and a half. This is Jamaica Station. If any of you have come into New York in recent years, you know that Jamaica Station is much expanded. And this is where the train to the plane is located. You make a change at Jamaica Station and train takes you to JFK Airport. This is an earlier version of Jamaica Station. Believe it or not, this component of the station is still there, covered up. Here's the Long Island Railroad stop at Kew Gardens. Some of you may remember this as the scene of a pretty horrific murder in the 1960s, where a young woman was being stabbed, and people looked out the window, but nobody helped her. It was one of those key crimes that made everybody lament what was happening to New York. Here's another Long Island Railroad station at Little Neck, 4th Street. Long Island Railroad Station at Forest Hills. This station here is still pretty intact and still pretty much looks like this. And Far Rockaway. The other area of train.
Hi, if I can interrupt.
Sure.
There was one question about the Allen Street fire.
Yeah.
What building was that was burning?
The Allen Street fire took down a bunch of tenements. Allen Street, the fire took place at Allen Street and Houston Street, which is still it's on the Lower East Side. At that time, the Lower East Side was full of immigrants, poor immigrants. And it was a pretty horrific fire because it took down about 3 or 4 buildings on that intersection. And it was a winter day. Everybody. It was one of those horrific experiences that took place in New York. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
So the trains, the great passenger trains that came into New York and left New York, the Empire State Express, that was the main passenger train that took people from the region, from upstate New York, from the Midwest into New York. And the Broadway Limited was run on the Pennsylvania system. This was what left the Manhattan transfer and went to points west. It also went to Chicago, went through the mountains in Pennsylvania. The Orange Blossom Special, I picked this because I love collecting postcards that have songs written about them. And the Orange Blossom Special was the New York to Miami service. And the 20th Century Limited. This was a very special train, designed in 1938, Art Deco design by Henry Dreyfuss. And this particular card was issued on its first day of service as a cachet and back. And I think one of the great Art Deco cards. Notice it promoted itself as taking the water level route. In other words, it went down the Hudson and Mohawk. Took 16 hours from Chicago to New York. That train was changed, still called the 20th Century, but it was changed to diesel service, and a new car was designed in the called the streamlined modern style. I love the image of people coming to greet the trains. And where were they greeted? Grand Central. This is the earliest version of Grand Central. And cars of Grand Central are highly collectible. There are many, many wonderful interiors of both Grand Central and the Penn Station. But this is the 1873 Grand Central, which became unfeasible at a certain point, and it was replaced by this station in about 1900. But this one became unfeasible too, because it could not accommodate the engines that were being built, and it just was not big enough. So Grand Central was replaced again in 1913. And this became the 1913 Grand Central Station, which is still in use. Front facade of the Grand Central Station, beautiful Beaux-Arts building surrounded by the old New York Central headquarters, today known as One Park Avenue. And a wonderful card depicting the various connections possible inside the Grand Central Station. The interior is still pretty much intact, and the one change that's being made to Grand Central Station, the one innovation, is that finally they are connecting the Long Island Railroad to the Grand Central Station. Long Island Railroad traditionally had only come in at Penn Station, but over the next couple of years, it's being integrated with the Long Island Railroad system. The main lobby of the Grand Central Station, with its ceiling mural of Zodiac, the information kiosk. Bones are still pretty much the same. Another view of that. And a view of the suburban concourse, which today is filled with restaurants. And of course, there are shops all over Grand Central Station. And I love collecting the stores, the advertisements. And some of you may know the Oyster Bar at Grand Central Station. This is an early card of the space that's the Oyster Bar, and also has the constructed with the Guastavino tiles. Penn Station had an interesting history. We said there was the problem of getting across the Hudson. So not only had to get across the Hudson, but had to create sufficient right of way to bring the train into a reasonable area in New York. So the Penn Station, Pennsylvania Station, was finally built in 1910 in neoclassical style. And they had to construct all of this right of way so they could bring the trains into the city. Beautiful design by the firm of McKim, Mead and White. And the interior was patterned after the baths of Caracalla in Rome. But at a certain point, Penn Station, they decided to take it down. And they pretty much put a floor at the bottom of this, and took down Penn Station and replaced it with the Madison Square Garden, which is still there today. And many of us, everyone says that the destruction of Penn Station led to the start of the preservation movement in New York, which it certainly did. Taxi cab pickup area, Penn Station, but Penn Station is no more. And that, unfortunately, is the end of our presentation.
Wow, thank you. My goodness. Well, first of all, let's go for questions. other people have comments I'm sure they'd like to make. Ray, do we have any other questions or comments?
Not from the chat room, Hal.
Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead real briefly. If you look at all of these collections of early or selection of early cards of New York City, are you noticing, like I am, that most of them are printed views and not real photos? I think in my collecting experience here in Kansas, in the last 20 years, printed cards have kind of taken a back seat. And if you have a real photo, then it's worth more money. It's better, and these kinds of this feeling. When I started collecting in the 1960s, you just collected postcards. And I can remember an antique dealer saying, "Oh, Hal, why don't you collect something pretty?" And they were wanting me to get into greetings or get into holidays and things like that. I was looking for street scenes mostly, or interior views, not necessarily real photos. I hadn't begun to think of real photos as different than printed cards, but it's just something to think about. And
great question. And I think it is particularly related to New York, in that the people who published these cards of the Grand Central and Penn Station was the Union News Company, which that's the company that ran the newspaper kiosks all over those stations. So they wanted cards to kind of fill their racks and take care of their customer base that was passing through and looking for images. There are many images, real photo postcards. Well, let's say there are many, but they are extremely rare. Some of the real photos in my own collection are images that were taken by passengers. Here's Mom and Dad on the 6th Avenue L at Herald Square. I've got a few of those, and those are extremely valuable. But in terms of the proportions of printed to real photo, there's a tremendous number of printed postcards, because those people running the kiosks wanted to feed their customer base with those printed cards.
Hi, if you would care to make a comment about the Grand Central Terminal cards that were published by Detroit. Kyle has brought up the fact that there's a set. Do you know anything about those? If you don't, maybe we could defer to Kyle.
Yeah, it's a wonderful set. I have them all, of course. But yeah, those were the Detroit cards. There's also a set of Detroits that were published by that were published at the Penn Station. But most of those cards you'll find are from Union News, which ran those kiosks. I think the Detroits were mostly distributed through their own retailing engine.
yeah,
Kyle, yeah, that's
a nice one. My goodness.
they're probably about, I'd say altogether, Detroit's of Penn Station and Grand Central. They're altogether probably about at least 35 or 40 of them.
Wow. How nice. How nice.
Also, hi, Sterling would like to know what was the average number of trains in use daily during the time of your?
It went up to about 1 million passengers a day. Even today, Penn Station processes about 600,000 passengers every day. But the golden age of railroading, the numbers were in excess of 1 million passengers a day, and they were accommodated, they were made comfortable, they were warmed and fed.
So to speak.
Okay, I had a couple things I just wanted to say, because I come from down the city. My father, in the only time in his life, walked the picket line at Penn Station to protest the tearing down of it. And in doing so, became a lifelong friend of Philip Johnson, the architect.
Right.
And the other thing was that Grand Central Station was sort of my home away from home. And I used to go down there every Friday night and Saturday night because I didn't have homework. And we would sneak out on the train platforms. You know, we didn't go through like when they were checking the tickets. We'd find a gate that was open.
Sure.
And we'd go out there and sit at the end of the platform to watch the train leave and go through the big yard underneath Park Avenue there. And it looked like a ballet, all these colored lights and all. And Grand Central is still one of the great sacred places in my life.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place. My own special corner is the Oyster Bar.
Oh yes, yeah.
And been a regular at the Oyster Bar for 40 years. All the oyster shuckers know me.
You know, when I was that age, this was back in the early 60s, I didn't like seafood yet, but they had fantastic hamburgers. And I learned to love seafood, so I had the oysters later in my life, but then it was fantastic hamburgers.
Yeah, for those who don't know the Oyster Bar, they regularly have about 30 or 40 different oysters from all over the United States, and keep them in stock on a regular basis. And some of them are extra large.
Yeah.
My favorites are those oysters the size of shoes.
And you could hear the trains rumbling on the loop right behind the restaurant. I don't know if they still use the loop, but you could hear them going by behind the wall.
I need lots of nice memories. I can remember going to Christmas shops in Grand Central Station during the Christmas time after, November and into December, and it filled with lots of commerce and things to not only travelers, but tourists and everyone to take home, buy as gifts and so forth. And nice memories.
The shops are still there. It's a wonderful tradition.
Really. And that center information kiosk right in the center of it.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
I know. Well, that's the place you always say, meet me at the clock, the information kiosk.
Yeah.
There you go. That's wonderful. Well, hi, thank you very, very much. Any other comments or questions from anybody?
Well, if anybody wants to keep up a communication, I'd be glad to be available. And email address. My email address is hy at qualidataresearch.com. Qualidata is QUALIDATARESEARCH, qualidataresearch.com.
And if you've missed that, I'll be glad to give it to you myself later, anytime you want to. But thank you, Hi. Thank you. We also want to thank Ray Hahn again today for his help with the questions. You know, sometimes there are more than others, but somebody to watch for them and to look for them. I know in some of the other months, that was my job, and I would totally forget it. So that's why we asked for either Ray or Bill to come in and help us. But we thank you and encourage you and urge you to look at postcardhistory.net. Look for some of Hi's articles. Look for just articles on anything having to do with postcard collecting. You'll really benefit, and they're free every single week, 4 different articles. And they're all, scheduled and indexed and so forth, so you can kind of find out more about them. Go ahead.
I want to thank you for all that you do to keep the Wichita Club going, and all that you do to support the hobby and support people in the hobby. So thank you. Thank you for being a great supporter.
That's sweet. Very nice. Okay. Thank you, Hi, once again for a great afternoon and for being with us. We really appreciate it. And watch for Hi, more presentations and more writings at postcardhistory.net. Take care, everybody, and bye-bye.